Welcome to the Tie-Dyed Therapist. I'm your host, Richard Killian. And today, we're going to talk about the adoption triad, so stay tuned. Thank you for joining me today. This is a very important topic for so many people, and especially for myself. And so today I want to start out by talking about one part of the adoption triad, which are adoptees. And I'm going to give you some observations that I have from personal experience, and I'm going to explain some things that has happened over the course of history for society and where we need to move forward, and fortunately, where we are moving forward. First off, I want to explain that 60 years ago, I was adopted. I was adopted as an infant when I was about 3 days old to a loving family in Wyoming. What happened, though, was that because of the laws and the customs and the beliefs and attitudes of that time, it was all shrouded in secrecy. You know, adoptees have faced this over the course of history. We are brought into a family that we would normally not be part of. We are brought into a tribe that we normally would not grow into. And then we're sort of planted in this position and asked to grow and asked to take on this family that really doesn't belong to us. Now, my parents were really good people, my adopted parents, and they told me early on about my adoption. But the main reason I think they did this was because when I was about 6 years old, I was looking through photograph albums and I noticed that I didn't look like anybody else in the pictures. Everybody else had a family resemblance, but not me. And when you're 6 years old, you ask a lot of questions. And so I did. And my parents gave me a very basic primer on the fact that I was adopted and this is, what happened, and they were so happy to have me and that I was chosen. All very loving things to say to a child. But I have to tell you that being told those things doesn't take away your primal drive for the need to know. Most adoptees that I've met over the years have all wanted to know where they came from. Something that people that aren't adopted don't understand completely is that when you're born into a family, you're automatically taught who you are, where you come from, where your people come from, what your family does for a living, your genetic history, your medical history. All of these factors get brought into play when you're growing up in a family. It's a very primal thing. It's like you're being part of this tribe. And if you're a tribal member, you get to know about everything that goes into being in your tribe. But for adoptees, that information is still out there somewhere. And of course, for me, it was all locked up. I mean, this was a private adoption. All of my medical history, all of my mother's history, my father's history, it was all locked up in a file. And it belonged to the state of Wyoming. And it was a closed record that couldn't get opened. So you can imagine what that did to me over the years, where I was trying to find out more information about myself and about my history. And my story isn't very different from anybody else's born in that era or subsequent years later. People are still trying to find out who they are. I have to tell you that things have gotten a lot better. But all this thing about adoptees and the secrecy and trying to find out who you are, this goes back generations and generations. I happen to think it probably goes back all the way to medieval times when there was a royal family and there was royal lineage, and you're the king, and you share a bed with your mistress, and your mistress has a child, and the child is deemed a bastard because they're not part of the royal blood lineage, and so they'll never be king. And I think that happened over and over again and again. So that brings me to the point that I really want to make on today, which is this idea of labels and what adoptees have been labeled over the years. When a woman brings a child into the world and she's not married, or she gives a child up for whatever reason, the child is deemed illegitimate or a bastard. Think about that for a minute. Does any baby or any child ever deserve the label of illegitimate? I mean, it's like saying, as a human being, you're not legitimate. And I can't think of a more inhumane way to describe somebody. It's a terrible label to hold on to. And yet, during my time growing up and the times of other people, that's what people were told. This child is illegitimate because they came from a mother that was unwed or not fit or wasn't able to take care of the child, so they had to give it up. So, fortunately, things are changing. There are such things as open adoptions. There's a lot of progressive things going on in the adoption community where people are learning about their birth parents. People have their medical information at the ready. You know, adoptive parents are learning to trust and be open to the idea that, you know, their child is still going to love them no matter what, because they were taken care of and because they were loved from day one. You know, one of the things about an infant, one of the developmental challenge points is called trust versus mistrust. And this came from a very famous developmental theorist by the name of Erik Erikson. What does trust versus mistrust mean? Well, it means that a baby has to learn to trust its caregiver. Babies are completely helpless in this world. They have to be fed, they have to be bathed, they have to be changed, they have to be held, they have to be loved. Babies have to feel the love of their caregiver. They have to feel that they can trust and bond with their caregiver, no matter who that person is, whether they're a birth parent or an adoptive parent or a guardian, whoever makes the decision to love that child. They have to prove to the baby they can be trusted. That's the developmental goal. So I leave you with those observations today. We're going to talk about the other two parts of the triad. We're going to talk about adoptive parents, and we're going to talk about birth parents. And anyway, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.